Hello, fellow griever, and welcome back to the Leftover Pieces. Today's episode is just a little brief bonus. We'll call it a mini-sode, but it's an important one. Now, many of you know that for years I have said that this is not a suicide prevention podcast. This is a suicide loss survivor podcast. This is a space for the aftermath, for the people left standing in the wreckage and devastation, trying to survive what feels completely unsurvivable. And I still believe that deeply. But I also believe something else just as strongly. Postvention is prevention. The people closest to this pain, the people who have lived through the loss like us, often carry insight, awareness, and perspective that the larger mental health world desperately needs to pay attention to. For years, I have said that someone needs to be researching why youth suicide has risen so dramatically over the last decade and a half, because the traditional suicide risk models we still hear repeated today were largely built around demographics that used to represent the highest statistical risk, particularly middle-aged men. And yet, that's not the highest risk group anymore. And so many grieving parents have said the same thing to me over and over again. My child didn't fit the warning signs. They weren't what people told me to watch for. There were no obvious red flags. And the truth is, many of today's young people are living in an entirely different world than the one those older models were built around. Technology, social media, digital overload, isolation, comparison, anxiety, bullying, predation. All of this has fundamentally changed the emotional landscape our children grew up in and are growing up in. So when researcher and personality expert Paul D. Tieger reached out to me about this study exploring potential links between inborn personality types and increased suicide vulnerability in young people, I immediately paid attention. Not because I think suicide is ever caused by one single thing, nor does he. And not because I believe people can be reduced to a personality category, but because I believe we desperately need researchers willing to ask new questions. In today's conversation, Paul shares the work he and his co-author Michael Selby are doing, including a short anonymous survey specifically for parents who have lost a child to suicide. If that's you, I hope that you will listen to this whole episode. It's not very long, and it's extremely important. And if you're not a parent, but you know a parent, please pass this along to them. The goal is to better understand whether certain personality patterns may correlate with increased suicide risk and vulnerability. I personally reviewed the survey language to help ensure it was a suicide-safe and sensitive survey for grieving parents. And I agreed to share it because I believe thoughtful, compassionate research matters. If participating feels supportive or meaningful to you, you'll find the survey link in today's show notes. It will also be coming out in a newsletter that I put out every Wednesday. And some of you may have seen it a few weeks back. And if you've already taken the survey, thank you. And as always, take what serves you and leave the rest. Let's get going in today's conversation with Paul. Hi, and welcome to the podcast, Paul. This is officially a little mini episode, but I'm so, honored and anxious to have it out for people to listen to. I know everybody's heard a little bit about you in the intro, but I would like to start by, asking you, for my listeners who may not know you yet, if you could share a little bit about your background and what really led you into this work around personality research, youth mental health, and subsequently adjacent to suicide prevention.
Sure. And thank you so much for this. So I've been involved with personality psychology for like 45 years. along with my former spouse. We wrote 5 books, and the last book I wrote was with Michael Shelby, who is a therapist, an addiction specialist, and this is a book called Reconnect. That it's about addiction, depression, anxiety, and so I've always been interested in what makes people tick. I was fortunate to work with the University of Minnesota College of Pharmacy a couple of years ago, and we did a massive study with 10,500 people and
Wow.
showed, based on them taking a personality assessment that I've created, which is a valid assessment, and a psychological assessment for anxiety and depression, that there were some personality types that were extremely more likely to suffer from severe anxiety and depression. And that really got my attention and their attention. And I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, and I've got a very, very soft spot in my heart for kids. I love kids, I love families. And I realized, these adults who were in the first study, your type doesn't change. So the same type as your little kid is not too different from who you are as a grown up. So the reality is that these kids are probably at the same risk. There has never been an assessment before created for parents to identify their children to see if we could do that. So I created this assessment, I validated it, and it was over 93% accurate, which was astounding. But parents were able to identify this of the 5 different personality types in this model, that this was my child, which was pretty amazing. So then in talking with you and talking with other people in the suicide community, post-venture community, realized that the way to really prove what I'm talking about, that certain kids are at greater risk for suicide, not just anxiety and depression, which of course are markers and predictors to some extent, was to design a research program where I could have parents posthumously try to identify their children's type. It's never been done before, so I created this survey, got some help from people like you and some other people, and the results so far show that 89% of the parents were able to identify the type of their child, which was really astounding for any personality assessment, especially one like this. So my goal about that is to continue collecting data, and my strong hope is that this becomes a model that's accepted, because there are a lot of things that people consider when they talk about prevention and risk factors, but nobody's been talking about personality assessments because nobody really has the experience and expertise for the deep dive that I have.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. That's so well explained. And you took out two questions with one, so we'll just proceed on. I, I I know I've told you this before because we've spoken before. We did work together on, you kind of refining some of your wording and
Sure.
things. But I think this is so, so desperately needed. So I'm just really anxious to have people listen to this and to get this book and to see the results of your research. But one thing I really appreciated about the approach that you take is that this research isn't about blame. It's not about blaming
Absolutely.
parents. It's not about blaming kids, not reducing someone to just a personality type. Can you talk a little bit about what this research is actually trying to understand?
Sure. Um, it's trying to understand who the sort of the essence of a child is. And, it's not that parents don't understand their children, but they don't look at it through the same lens that I have for many, 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 many years, including writing the book called Nurture by Nature, which is the first book that linked personality type to parenting. So contrary, I mean, the opposite of blame is everything is tragic about losing a child to suicide. But what's doubly tragic is the fact that there are 2 types of these children that have 2 things in common that make it very hard to identify whether they're going to do something or not. First, they feel things very deeply, and second, they don't share them, even with
Hmm.
their parents, and sometimes especially with their parents,
Hmm.
because they don't want to be a burden. They don't want to freak their parents out. Um, they don't want to be dragged to a psychologist, whatever their fear is, right? And that's about those 2 types. Those are 25% of the population. But in the research we've done so far, they come out to be 70% of the kids that took their life, which is astounding.
That's astounding. Yeah, that's exactly the word I was thinking. That's
Almost
astounding.
3 times as many of these kids than other kids take their life. And the reason is parents get blindsided because these
Hmm.
kids, I've heard this, and I know you've heard it many, many times. The kids don't check any of the boxes. In fact, they have friends. Many of them have friends. They're doing well in school. They're looking forward to the next stage of their life, going to college, whatever. And tragically, the parents don't find out.
Overachievers, yeah, I see it all the
Exactly.
time. Hmm.
And they don't find out until afterward. And then they read their child's diary and then so this is, it's tragic on so many levels, but even the most vigilant parent, it's almost impossible for them to tell. And the other thing that makes this even worse is the best predictor, and I use the word best in quotes, of a future suicide is a previous attempt. And 65% of these kids never make another attempt.
Right.
So I think it's a perfect storm. And far from blaming the parents, it's commiserating with parents by saying, you did not have a good shot at seeing this. And that's my goal, is to get parents aware that their child might be in this category. And if they are, how do we get to them to have the conversation where the child feels safe enough to open up to the parent, and then they can find out the true story.
Yeah, and in layman's terms, what I heard you just point out is a fact that those of us in the suicide loss community, as parents, know explicitly is that suicide is complex and multifactorial. There isn't any one certain thing, but this goes a long way to helping parents early identify risk.
Right, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Um, Two of the personality types, as you said, appeared to show up much more often in people who were actively depressed, actively having high anxiety. Ultimately, that runs alongside with having more of a suicide risk. So,
Right.
without oversimplifying it, can you explain what stood out about those two groups and maybe talk about what they are? And we will also link people to your book as
Sure.
well as the suicide, as well as the survey. We will link them to
Of,
both. But yeah, if
of
you could,
course. The,
yeah.
the two types in my books I call gentle, humble helpers, which are people who are very kind of kids that are down to earth, realistic, very sensitive. They usually have a real affinity for pets. They take good care of their siblings or younger siblings. They end up often in helping professions. They don't like conflict, but they're not deep thinkers. They're not people that contemplate the future. And when they get freaked out, they hold stuff inside. And because they don't see options, they're also impulsive. So when they don't see options, they're more likely to do something. The other group I call creative sensitive souls, which are similar in a sense that they feel things deeply, but they have a more creative bent. So they are very idealistic. They see the way the world should be, and it's not that way. They feel a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. They don't want to burden their parents. They tend to worry a lot, so they don't think things are going to get any better. And even though they're not as impulsive as the gentle, humble helpers, they feel a desperation. And I think those are the reasons why those kids are actually at the greatest risk of all types.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I appreciate that little explanation. And again, I know that people will be able to go deeper into it in your book, but that gives us a little bit of a working knowledge of it for this conversation. What exactly are you hoping to learn from parents who are listening, who participate in this new survey?
Right. Well, that's a really key question. I want to confirm what my instincts tell me. My instincts have told me a very long time that the same kids that are chronically and severely depressed, are also the ones that take their lives. But that research has never been done.
Hmm.
So I think that when we get a bigger participation rate, and thankfully, the people like you and the people that are part of your community, it'll be crystal clear. And then the suicide prevention community can't really ignore that. So they will start to embrace this as another risk factor. And my ultimate goal, Melissa, is to have a website. I'm calling this project the Van Gogh Project, and the website's being built as we speak. That will be free to every parent. It's completely anonymous. It takes about 5 minutes to complete. Actually, the assessment, the survey that we're talking about today, takes about 5 minutes. The website itself will only take about 3 minutes, separate from that. And parents will be able to learn a lot more about their children, be able to, communicate, I think, better with them, and have open dialogue. And my goal is to really blast this out to make it available to all parents. That's my mission. I've been doing this for a long time, but It's interesting. I didn't really find my calling till I was 75, which was a year ago, and it's a wonderful blessing to me to be able to do this kind of thing and have the expertise and have the gifts that can help me do this, and to have people like you helping me.
Well, I'm glad that you reached out because, like you said, postvention is unfortunately the most powerful prevention that there is out there. And, I do know um, that this survey was intentionally designed to be short, anonymous, and as emotionally non-activating or considerate as possible, however you want to put
Exactly.
that. Can you explain what parents can expect from this brief survey if they choose to
Sure.
participate?
Sure. First thing is they will take this assessment. The assessment takes 2 or 3 minutes. And again, 89% of the people so far who have been able to figure out their child's personality type who have passed away find that very, very quickly. And then
Mm-hmm.
they'll read a profile about that child. And they'll talk about, who they are, how they operate, how they need to be nurtured. Um, and then there'll be a lot of resources that are available for people in the lost community about how to, and they'll be asked to validate it also, how accurately does this describe you? And then they'll be given a lot of resources, you know, um, your organization is part of that, but there's a lot of other resources that will help them. Their answers, again, there's no names involved of them, their children, anything like that. There's no IP addresses, emails, nothing that identifies people. Um, and then what we will be doing, we'll be sharing that information. We're sharing with you, sharing with other people that might be the subject of a future podcast or part of a newsletter, and certainly
Mm-hmm.
other people in the lost community.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be following up with that so people can know here in a few months or whenever that's appropriate, how that's all come out. So, um, if a parent is listening right now and is wondering whether taking the survey could really matter, what would you want them to know?
I think it can matter enormously. I mean, I don't want to sound grandiose here, but I think this is a game changer. And I think we together and with the parents who've suffered this horrible loss can impact and can actually save countless lives. I honestly believe it can save countless lives. And I know from talking to enough parents that anyone who's been has suffered the agony of losing a child just doesn't want anybody else to go through it. So there's that altruistic motivation. But I think there's also another thing, and that is if parents that take this have other children, it will alert them to the other children as well. It might tell them new stuff about their other children.
Yeah.
So I think there's two reasons.
Something that I know I don't think I necessarily told you I was going to ask you, but I feel like you'll absolutely be happy to answer it because I know I have had at least two questions about this and I didn't know the answer. So, why does it only include children over the age of 10 and exclude autism spectrum diagnosis? Because those are,
Yeah,
my understanding, are the two caveats.
good questions. Well, it's other people with other neurodevelopmental issues as well.
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm.
because, first of all, the 10 thing is because you can't really identify type before then. Its type is pretty complex, and the assessment I created is very simple, and it's based on a lot of years of looking at items that work. But it's very, very hard to type somebody who's younger than that. And the
Yep.
reality is my understanding is most of the suicides that happen among younger people happen in that age range. There's not that many, I don't think, that happen before 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that piece of it. Am I wrong? Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not wrong. Unfortunately, I wish I could tell you that there's no 12-year-olds or 11-year-olds. There is, but you're right. I've hardly ever heard of
Yeah.
anybody younger than 10. You're
Right.
right.
And,
Um,
and the other piece was why no, autism or neurodevelopmental issues. And that is just because I am not an expert in those
mhm.
areas, and that's a very strong overlay.
Yep.
So that could be a confusing factor,
Yep.
and we wouldn't be sure if the assessment was really measuring the personality type or was measuring the person type as it's sort of distorted by these different conditions.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I totally understood that. I just know that that would answer
Good.
those questions for anybody that wondered. So, kind of the last question here. Um, what do you hope happens, or what could parents hope that happens if this research continues to show the same strong correlations that you've already seen?
Right. Well, I should say I'm very confident that they will. And I think what I hope will happen is that, first of all, I help individual parents because I want every parent, if I wave the magic wand, I want every parent to be able to take this and to take it. I also think that the mental health community would be a very good source of this to refer to parents. Not necessarily that mental health counselors would take it for other kids, but that it would be a resource for parents and educators as well. Schools should know about this, and schools are starting, as you know, to start doing programs around suicide. They're being forthright. They're not trying to hide the ball on this because they know that talking about it doesn't cause suicide. In fact, it can prevent suicide. So
Yeah.
those are the goals that I'm hoping to achieve. And I think if we get enough people taking this, I do believe that's achievable.
Well, I appreciate having this conversation so much. I know that some of my listeners that also get my newsletter may have already taken this survey, and if they have, appreciate that. If they know other parents, please feel free to forward that. But if you are listening and haven't taken it, know that the link is in the show notes to this podcast. If you are not already on my email list, it is coming in the newsletter that comes out this evening. It will also come out in at least one other one in the future. You can also connect. I will also have the link for the book, which is called Reconnect, a personalized plan to protect your child from anxiety and depression fueled by digital addiction. And I'll link that as well as the link directly to you should somebody feel the need to
Absolutely.
ask you more questions and reach out to you. Anything
I'm
else you'd like
100%.
to add as we
I'm just 100% open to having people reach out to me, either email, phone. I'm accessible. I want to hear from people. The only thing I would add is just I'm so grateful to you for the work that you do. I know you came to it not because you wanted to come to it, which happens with so many parents. And my heart goes out to anyone who listens to your podcast who is a loss survivor. I think I'm a pretty empathetic guy, but I can't really imagine it, but I'm trying to imagine it. And
yeah.
I'm trying to do my part to help. And I so appreciate your help.
Well, for what it's worth, none of us want somebody else to be able to imagine it, but
No,
we sure appreciate somebody being willing to help ensure that no other parents join this club. So it's definitely the place you never want to find yourself. So
absolutely.
I appreciate you. I appreciate this time and letting me put this out into my community so that we can help and let this be. I mean, I look at it as a small piece of Alex's legacy that I can
Mhm.
contribute to this. In any way. So thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. And I, look forward to future connections and we'll update everybody as the
And
research goes on.
Melissa, if you wanted to include my email address someplace, I'm happy to do that too.
Okay. I will put that in
Do
the show notes as well, Paul. I
it.
appreciate it.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
we
Thank you
will
so
talk
much.
soon, sir. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so very
Mhm,
much.
mhm. So thank you for being here today. If something in this episode resonated with you, please feel free to share it with someone who might need it too. For resources, coaching, or ways to work with me, visit theleftoverpieces.com. And for now, take what serves you and leave the rest. Talk soon.